Hi, Garrett. Everyone's coming in quickly.
Hi, everybody.
I'm just asking how they're feeling or what draws them to tonight's topic. You know how it is.
Good.
Hey, Garrett.
How are you? Good to see you, David.
Thanks. I'm out on holiday on the West Coast here in La La Land.
Oh, we're glad you're joining us on holiday.
Yeah, I couldn't miss this meetup, could I?
Well, I'm really honored to hear you say that because we appreciate you just as much.
Even with my adverse views, it's still enjoyable.
David, you always have intellectually interesting things to say, and you always have a reasonable perspective. Even if I don't agree with you, your perspective always seems reasonable to me, even if I come to a different conclusion. So, yeah, it's always appreciated.
Well, I have a tear. You're so nice. You're so kind, Garrett.
I'm actually more honest than I am nice. If it makes you feel even better. So,
yeah, you're right. I've got double tears now.
there you go. So who wants to go next?
Go.
Anyone? Elle, good to see you again. I recognize you. Although you just went off video, so now I don't see you, but there we are. And Sean, good to see you. Victoria, Katie. I think Tamara's been here before tonight. So a lot of regulars. Octavio. Who wants to go and say a little bit about what interests them in the idea of when to use reason versus intuition? I find this to be a really interesting topic.
Yeah, I agree. This is Tamara chiming in. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm definitely interested in this topic. I'm very excited for tonight's discussion. I hope to participate a little more than I normally do. Just been really busy with work, to be honest.
I hear you.
Sometimes working at the same time, listening to these discussions. So, no, I definitely, I study math, science, teach statistics, love stats, love the whole, idea of reason as well as understanding intuition. So both mindsets. So I can't give a clear answer, but I can definitely tell you that this is going to be very exciting. So thank you.
Cool. I hope that we meet those expectations and I'll try to exceed them if I can. I think Aristotle was actually one of the originators of sort of reason-based thinking, like using that as a methodology. I was reading a book and I forget if it was Aristotle, Plato, or Socrates, but one of the three of them, and I think it was Aristotle. Andrew, you have your hand up.
Oh, sorry. Was just going to participate, but please finish.
Yeah, please. No, I want you to participate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're more important.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Andrew, guys. I'm excited about this talk because I like you talk about the intuition function and you're an ENTJ. So then I would hope at some point, I was hoping at some point we can discuss what are we associating reason with, the sensing function or the thinking function, or like if we can get into typology of that'd be very interesting, because intuitions is just jumps. It's not rational, right? There's something. So anyway, that's just something that interests me deeply.
Yeah, and I'm going to try to make an argument that some intuition is rational, and you can tell me if I convince you of that. When I started writing the essay on this subject or creating the pitch, I thought that was the only time that intuition made sense, but then you'll see that I have other reasons that it makes sense too. So, but yeah, who else wants to go on there? I see someone raising their hand. DR.
Hi, nice to meet everybody. I was my DR's short for David Raymond, so I don't know if David R happens to be Raymond, but I kind of coming at this from two angles. One, I have the intuitive personality, so sometimes my intuition tells me an answer, and then I have to kind of use logic to backfill how I got there. But also, I did a thesis in AI, and that was a lot of, to me, pattern recognition and intuition are interrelated, and so machines are very good at logic, obviously, and not historically good at pattern recognition, but then AI is really trying to get at pattern recognition. So I'm kind of think of it that way as well. So excited to be part of the conversation.
Great. Thank you. And yeah, I sometimes use intuition to get an answer. Actually, my essay on free will was an intuitive answer, and then I wrote the essay backing it up. So, Sean.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, good to see you.
Sean. Yeah. Today's topic is less political. So
It is.
like we're going to have an easy light today. No one
Oh,
gets
people
pissed
still
off
get very
or-
heated about non-political stuff, Sean. Like philosophy
Serious,
gets
today's
very
look
heated
like
too,
today's
so
topic is less political. Okay.
don't underestimate the chances of fire going on tonight. So
I would say reasons should be above intuition. This is my opinion. Okay, when we make this decision or whatever, we should use reason first. Only sometimes you have some like an emergency, you don't have time to think. Especially some emergency situation. If you feel say at night you go somewhere you feel not right, maybe it's dangerous, then don't go. Okay. That's my thinking. Okay.
that's one of the reasons I say to use intuition, Sean. So we're on the same page there.
Okay.
But I think there are others too, which I'll go into. But thanks for that. Al, good to see you.
Same. So I'm really interested in this topic because personally, I kind of really lean on the intuition side of the spectrum just naturally. And I do want to kind of figure out if I'm open to figuring out if, when to use reason instead. That I understand that you can't just use one versus the other all the time, but there's a time and a place for both. So it's interesting. It's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think there are different times for different ones, and I'll go into more detail on that. Michael, go ahead.
Yes, well, I put this kind of issue in big perspective. When we're born, we're thrown into the world, and we have to deal with that world. We come equipped with the ability to think about it, to make conclusions about it, to react to it. And I would end with the question of intuition versus reasoning. Let's say there's really a continuum, and there's no sharp division in the continuum in this continuum. So you could go from Aristotle, who's tries to pin down these concepts more precisely, and then the author of Fast and Slow, I forgot his name now. He tries to get very precise and empirical, but basically, it's at one end of the continuum is your actions are more immediate, and then at the other end of the continuum you have deliberation. I don't know, it's not called deliberation. So what you're doing is you're talking about the behavior. You're thinking about it. You're trying to correct what you've done, because it might have been might have been a poor decision, and we have evolved this extra facility to look back at our decisions or react to our decisions in such a way that we can correct them, and that's the evolutionary basis of this continuum.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, let's talk about that in the conversation portion. Is it a strict reason or intuition, or is there a gradient, and how much of a gradient is there? I'll put that in the list of questions. And with that said, George, you want to go next? Gonzalez?
Yes, hello.
Hey.
In a I think this notion of reason versus intuition is predicated on a Newtonian understanding of the world, which is to say that we can reason out the behavior of matter and energy in precise ways. Whereas what quantum mechanics has taught us is that there is significant instability in terms of the behavior of matter and energy. And of course, we're talking about humans behaving. You know, there's always going to be a variability there. So yes, I mean, reason can foreground and should foreground our decisions. But in the final instance, we are going to have to use intuition to operate through the world, because there's an inherent instability, uncertainty in the way that matter and energy behave, and certainly in the way that humans behave. So by definition, we have to rely on a combination of reason and intuition. Now, you know, there's no formula here. It just depends on the circumstance. But intuition certainly is part of life. I mean, let me put it another way. If the world were indeed black and white, if there were no need for intuition, I would submit that life would not be worth leading, right? Everything will be set for us, and there'd be no philosophy, no ethics. So not only is intuition required, but it is part of what makes the world interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I would argue if there's no free will, there's no meaning to life, which is, I think, along the lines of what you're saying, but a different conversation for a different night. So for now, let me let
Oh,
Janet go.
sorry, it's
Yeah, go
Alice.
ahead,
I
Alice.
just wanted to butt in. We've got about 5 more minutes, and we've got a lot of new people tonight. So if you notice the chat, I put our links to the Freethinker Institute meetup, as well as our Discord online community. And how it works is Garrett will present the topic, and then afterwards we'll have a sharing, open sharing, okay?
And I'm presenting tonight. We have different presenters, different times. I present more often than anyone else because I'm the default presenter if we don't have another one, but we welcome people presenting. If anyone has a topic they're interested in presenting to the group, feel free to reach out to me or Ellis afterwards. And that said, I want to let Janet go.
Great, thank you. Let me lower my hand. So I agree, and it's a great topic that it's not either or, it's more like the gradient. I think you had posed it, and you know, to say it's one or the other, it's just maybe something that could work in a conversation. But you know, the way that we think, and I love this topic of awareness and how, you know, we live our lives in the world, how we interact and interpret and move forward. I think that it would almost be as if we're trying to define how do you walk? Like, you can't really speak about it as much. But let me give an example. I tend to have, and I guess I'm patting myself on the back a bit. I love the fact that I have situational awareness. It's just something I find that I'm not stopping to think. I just, you know, experience it, the temperature of the room or whatever. But when I was driving earlier, I was thinking about, like, you just don't stop to think about pulling backwards into a spot. I mean, that can apply to many, many things. I'm not sure that's intuition, but it's more relying upon, like, just taking in information without truly processing it. And the role of AI and how that overlaps is really intriguing to me. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for coming. Anna, do you want to go next?
Sure.
Good to see you
I
again.
am very left brain, so that's my tendency. However, and this will show my crazy thinking pattern, when I thought about this, I thought if I was evaluating whether someone was a good person or not, I trust my dog more than me. I have had many experiences where one dog or another has literally saved me because of their intuition. That's all.
That's very interesting, Anna. And I, having grown up with pets, I agree with you. Pets don't generally have a pretty good intuition. I don't know if they're always right, but I definitely see the value in what you're saying. That said, let me go to Jose.
Yes, I missed the first couple of minutes, so I raised my hand, but I'm not sure what is the question that you were asking.
Oh, we're just asking about your interest in the conversation topic tonight about reason versus intuition.
Yeah, okay, so my interest is, first of all, is try to define what, if there is a common understanding of what intuition is. Some people define intuition as gut feel. Some people define intuition as intuition with a lack of knowledge. Some people believe intuition requires knowledge, and others that is a higher order thinking. So I just hope that we can, I can get out of the conversation, the dialogue, an understanding first of what intuition is before we start debating intuition versus reason. That's all.
Yeah, so we will start with definitions tonight. Hussein, who used to join us from the West Coast, will be proud of us. He always liked to start with definitions, and I do think that's a good way to start in a philosophical conversation, because no matter what, like, we may not agree on the definition, but as long as we use the same definition for the conversation, we can have a meaningful conversation. It's when two people are talking with two different definitions on the same conversation that you don't find common ground. And you may not find common ground in other areas, but it's a more meaningful conversation as long as you define things. So, Mansoor, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Basically, first of all, that's a very good topic to discuss. And my question actually is basically the same as the Jose's. What's actually the origin of the intuition? Is it basically actually the feeling in the gut, or some consciousness, or I don't know, knowledge? Is there any very correlation between the intuition and the reasoning? How we can actually just make a difference when we make a conclusion, how we can actually just make sure it's based on our intuition or our reason? That's my question. Yep, that's it. Thank you.
Great. I'm just taking down a bunch of these questions, and I'm going to try to answer them after the presentation. We have two more hands up, and then because it's a couple minutes after 7, I'm going to start the presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for a conversation afterward as well. So David R. David put his hand down.
Here we are.
Okay, there you go. Go ahead.
I told you I have a wonky iPhone, and
Don't worry.
The screen doesn't work sometimes. But anyway, I would say, personally, I say, because I'm kind of a physicalist, so I think intuition is just a highly developed skill. So you know something, you don't have to sort of methodically analyze it because you've already dealt with it to the extent that you automatically know answers. But it's just a reason applied to certain situations that you become skillful at, in my view of intuition. So there's nothing special about intuition. It's, in my opinion, it's just something that's really well known to you through past experience and reading about it or whatever. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I'm going to partially agree with that and leave open the door for something that disagrees with it, but not try to make a convincing argument tonight because we don't have time for it. Octavio.
I think that reason is a good tool to use in order to discover knowledge of things that are within our reach, in our time and our ability to discover the truth. But we also have things that are beyond our current understanding, like the human soul, the afterlife, the eternal questions that that any honest person would ask themselves. I think that intuition is the only tool to use in order to discover the truth of these things.
Thanks, Octavio. I'm going to politely suggest that a different story that you come to the event on reincarnation, because I'm actually going to try to make a logical argument for an afterlife. And I'd be curious to know if you find it convincing, because it kind of goes against your current beliefs. And I'd be curious to know if you find it convincing if you come that night. We would love to see you again. Zola, do you want to go next?
Yes, I think I have figured it out. Intuition is the starting point, and then you can, the more time you have, the more reasoning you can do to improve on your idea or your belief or your decision. And it depends on how much time you decide to allocate to a specific problem. And the more reasoning you do, the better it gets. That's it.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you, Zola, in my presentation that things start with intuition, whether we like it or not. And that said, I'm actually going to get into the presentation, and I'm not going to be able to follow the chat. So if people want to call out stuff that's said in the chat and bring it up in the conversation, just raise your hand, because unfortunately I am a terrible multitasker like most human beings, and I can't follow the chat along with the voice conversation. So can you guys, whoops, let's I guess I can jump to the second slide, which is the oh, I forgot to do the agenda, so I'm not going to have an agenda. But so let me first start with a little bit of a background on the Freethinker Institute. So I'll start with myself. My name is Garrett Lang. I'm a software developer turned software inventor turned entrepreneur. My hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy, and I'm also the executive director of the Freethinker Institute. And basically, the Freethinker Institute is a warm, open-minded community trying to support and empower members to be the best version of themselves, seek truth, and be fair through transformational personal and professional development. We have free events every Tuesday evening like this one. This is part of a series that we do throughout the year. And we cover a wide range of topics not usually covered in academia or industry, at least not broadly. And we usually have, we also have weekly members only events for people that want to apply practical wisdom into our daily lives. And we have only one rule in the Freethinker Institute, so I will bring it up now and probably not again, but unless I need to enforce it, and that is to remain polite. Keeping a little bit dispassionate helps us remain polite. It's great to be passionate about a subject, but when you convey your opinion, if you're a little bit dispassionate in the way of conveying it, it'll keep people's mind a little more open to your opinions. So keeping things polite is a key way to get people to be more agreeable with you. And I would argue that when someone says something that you strongly disagree with, rather than just contradicting them and telling them they're wrong, I would encourage us to ask questions about why they believe what they believe and how they came to that conclusion, because we learn more by listening to why someone else came to a conclusion we disagree strongly with. We call that listening to understand in the Freethinker Institute. So just want to encourage that kind of behavior. And with that said, I'm going to go into the presentation. Let me go to the next slide. And I'm going to save questions for the end based on popular opinion. People prefer to hear the whole presentation before we take questions. So for people with their hands up, I don't know if you mean to have them up to ask a question, but if not, you can go ahead and put them down. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll do hands up and answer questions and have conversation. And we can have back and forth in the conversation as well. And yeah, so starting with definitions, intuition is the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning. It's just an intuitive, like, it's just I accept this as true. It's a fundamental acceptance of something as true without the logical defense of that thing being true. Reasoning is thinking, understanding, and forming judgments by a process of logic. And you'll see that these two are very complementary, and it's not one or the other. In fact, I would argue you can't have reason without intuition, at least as a starting point. I'm going to make that argument, and people are welcome to disagree with me in the conversation part, but I think it's pretty defensible position to have. But I'd argue that you know, reason is super useful in a lot of situations, and sometimes intuition is more useful, and we'll talk about the two. So we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of intuition. So cognitive dissonance is the state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes, especially as relating to behavioral decisions or attitude change. So one of the, you know, intuition is often referred to as trusting your gut. A bunch of people mentioned that. And advantages of intuition are that it considers a lot of factors at one time, especially if you're at a specific expert or an expert in a specific area. If you see the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about people who are experts in art history, and they'll take a glance at a famous photo and within seconds go, that's a forgery, it's fake. And it will be sometimes a forgery that has fooled experts in the industry for a long time, maybe experts who relied too much on reason. And when they finally came up with scientific experiments that proved it true or false, as authentic or not, it turned out that these experts' intuition was right, that it was a forgery. And so, you know, intuition can sometimes be very powerful when you're an expert in a specific area. That intuition can take into account a lot of factors that you can't consciously, you know, put together in that period of time. Also, if you are making intuitive decisions, if you're making a decision very quickly, meaning, and Sean brought this up, I think it was Sean, where, you know, you need to decide to run or to fight, right? You don't have time to like think about it reasonably. You have to decide immediately, am I going to run or am I going to fight? And you just have to make an intuitive decision because you don't have time to decide one or the other, because you're going to be forced into a decision if you don't decide quickly. A disadvantage is that it's easy to confuse intuitive decisions with emotional decisions. A lot of the time people will say I'm making an intuitive decision when really they're making an emotional decision. And I would argue that emotional decisions are almost always bad decisions. Very few times will you make a decision based on at least negative emotions, you know, and even positive emotions. You know, like a lot of marketers try to trick us into buying things by making us think we'll be happy if we buy that thing. Apple's really good at this, and I love Apple, so I'm not speaking against Apple, but they're really good at making us feel like, oh, if we have an Apple, we'll simply be happy. And the truth is, I am a little bit happier with an Apple because it breaks down less often. And so there is some truth to it, but a lot of times in marketing, there is no truth behind the emotions that they relate to their product. And they just make you feel like if you have that product, you'll suddenly feel better again. The pharma industry does this all the time. I watch pharma ads, and it's like, they'll have this, you know, ad for a, you know, arthritis or something like that. And they'll have like older people running around and playing and being very active. And then they'll give the caveats of all the side effects of the medication. It'll take like 30 seconds to say all the horrible things that could happen to you if you take that medication. But they're still instilling in you this emotion that you're going to be happier with that medication. And probably some people are. I'm not against the pharma industry. It does a lot of good for a lot of people. And there are a lot of good things about medications and people whose lives it transforms in a positive way. But what I'm trying to say is that emotional decisions are often things that are not like sound decisions and not good decisions for your long-term well-being or the long-term well-being of people you can influence. And so, you know, if you make emotional decisions and call them intuitive, you're tricking yourself into making bad decisions by thinking that it's an intuitive decision rather than, you know, actually making an intuitive decision. And so you have to be really cautious to to distinguish between, is this an intuitive decision or is it an emotional decision? And we'll talk about how, how we can decide whether or not a situation is better for an intuitive decision or a reason-based decision. And the other thing is, intuitive decisions don't necessarily feel the need to be consistent, whereas reason generally feels the need to be consistent, because if you have a bunch of premises that you're starting from, or axioms, they're called, if you have consistent logic, you'll make consistent decisions. And so you don't end up with this cognitive dissonance, which is why I defined cognitive dissonance in the beginning. You won't end up with this inconsistent set of beliefs if you're using more reason-based decisions. So that's one of the disadvantages of intuitive decisions. If you make a lot of intuitive decisions, you can end up with a lot of cognitive dissonance where you just you find yourself being torn in two different directions at the same time, and that creates a cognitive load that is difficult to deal with. So another thing is that intuition is not a good source if you're not already an expert in an area. Making intuitive decisions about complicated subjects that you don't know much about, or where you're not really an expert, is probably not a good idea. It's probably better to reason your way through those things. And I would argue that's because intuition is not super effective if you're not already an expert in an area, unless you're just making an intuitive decision about a fundamental aspect that can't be found through reason. And I'll talk about the types of things it's the axioms that I was mentioning before, where you can't use reason to come up with those things. And so you necessarily need to use intuition for your fundamental assumptions. So my takeaway is, try not to be in an emotional state when you're making intuitive decisions, because if you're in an emotional state when you're making an intuitive decision, you may well be confusing emotion and intuition. If you're not in an emotional state and you feel confident that you're making an intuitive decision about an area that you're an expert in, probably a good place to use an intuitive decision. And if you're in a situation where you don't have a lot of time, again, probably a good place to use an intuitive decision. And low stakes decisions, fine to use intuition. Do you want cornflakes or Cheerios for breakfast? Feel free to make an intuitive decision, right? No big harm is going to be caused if you choose cornflakes and you really wanted Cheerios just an inch more, right? And so low stakes decisions, no big deal to use intuition. High stakes decisions about make or break relationship kinds of conversations, probably not a good idea to use intuition, especially not when you're in an emotional state. So advantages and disadvantages of reason. Well, you can make very sound decisions when you start from axioms, you use formal logic and reasoning to come to conclusions, and you make very consistent conclusions. It reduces hypocrisy and cognitive dissonance, which go hand in hand. The hypocrisy is what creates cognitive dissonance, the hypocrisy in beliefs and ideas. And so that creates a really solid basis for a belief system that you can live with comfortably without feeling a lot of that cognitive dissonance negativity that comes up when you have inconsistent beliefs. And so also having a consistent set of beliefs makes you more trustworthy to other people, because when people see hypocrisy, that's why hypocrisy has a bad name. Although I would argue that there are certain areas where hypocrisy is okay. If anyone wants me to go into where those are, it relates to our conversation last year about how science and spirituality can be compatible rather than having to be at odds. But it gets onto a different topic, so I'm not going to go into it in the presentation tonight. But if anyone wants to know about that, feel free to ask about it in the Q&A section. Disadvantages are that it takes time to reason through things. It's slow. Reasoning through things is slow, especially if you're making non-emotional reason. If you're using reason and not sidetracking to emotion, emotion can also hijack reasoning. So there are three parts of the brain. There's the cerebrum, which is the logical thinking part of the brain. There's the mammalian part of the brain, which is the emotional part of the brain. And then there's a reptilian, which is fight or flight. And in that order, the later ones can always hijack the earlier ones. So fight or flight can hijack both of the others. The mammalian or emotional brain can hijack the reason-based brain. And so you kind of have to be sure whether you're using intuition or you're using reason. You don't want to be emotional when you're making decisions, because that's going to probably lead to bad decisions. And so I would argue any big decisions you're making in life, try to meditate, be calm, do it when you wake up after a good night's sleep. But don't be in an emotionally laden state when you're making those big decisions, no matter which methodology you're using. And so you do want to make sure you give reasoning enough time, because you want to consider all the relevant factors. If you leave out the most important factor in a reason-based decision, you're very likely to come to the wrong answer because you've left out the most important factor. And you may not have thought of the most important factor until 3 hours into your thinking. And if it's talking about which college you want to go to as a high school student, like, that most important factor might be really important and change the trajectory of your life. Now, the truth is that that's a bad example, because they've done studies, and it doesn't really matter which college you go to, as long as you're a smart person and you're hardworking, you're very likely to be successful, whether you go to community college or an Ivy League. And I say that as someone who went to an Ivy League. So, really what school you go to, not super important. What matters is that you're smart and hardworking. And if you're those two things, and hardworking, I mean persistent, grit, having grit, tenacity. You can use the same synonym for the, different synonyms for the same thing. But ultimately, those are more what matter. And those are more, you're going to make a better reason-based decision if you have that persistence to think through something very carefully and thoughtfully and consider all the important factors. So for large, important decisions, especially ones where you're not already an expert, and usually most decisions we make life decisions about, we're not an expert in, because most of us are not are experts in life, like as a holistic belief system. And so, what career choice you want to pursue, that's something to reason through. Like, what are the things I enjoy doing? What are the things I enjoy doing that also have a reasonable compensation? So that you're not worrying about money all the time, even if you love what you do, and trying to find that overlap. That's something that's worth spending a lot of time to think about, because you're going to spend, a third of your life, working basically. You might as well enjoy it and also be well compensated for it, so you're not always worrying about money. So don't mean to digress on that, but how intuition complements reason. So when you're reasoning, you have to start from axioms. All logic starts from axioms, which are just assumptions. They're things that we have to assume to be true. You have to assume, to basically operate in life, that there is this objective reality that we live in. You don't have to. I don't want to make that bold of a claim, but most of us assume that there is some objective reality that we're navigating and we're trying to get a better understanding of, and that every time we put a match under a piece of paper that it's going to light on fire. We assume that that's true. We assume that the laws of physics are going to remain constant throughout time. There are a bunch of assumptions that we're just naturally making, and those are axioms. They're things that we just establish as, like, this is a fact. I can't logically prove that the laws of physics won't change. Using Bayesian epistemology, I can say, probabilistically, we don't have any evidence that they have changed in our observable time period of scientific reasoning. So we can largely defend the idea that they don't change, but we can't logically prove that they won't change, with reason. Mathematicians can't even logically prove that mathematics is based on, a logically sound ground. And that might sound weird. And I think it's more because they aren't making some assumptions that they probably should. But that is kind of the common consensus in mathematics, is that all of mathematics is not fully logically grounded. And so what I would argue is that we always have to use intuition to come up with the axioms that we're going to believe in. Axioms basically, come from intuition and saying, this set of facts are so obvious. Like an example of an axiom that I use in my essay on free will is that at any given point like point in space or a three-dimensional space of an arbitrarily small size, there either is mass energy in it or there is not mass energy in it. It's one or the other. There can't be both mass energy in that point in space and no mass energy at the point in space at the same time. There either is or there is not. And that's kind of an axiom. It's an assumption. Now, from those axioms, and we create much higher level axioms when we're using reasoning in day-to-day life. And from those axioms, we can use logic and reason to come to conclusions that help us make better decisions about our lives and the lives of people we can influence, that help us come to a better understanding of objective reality, which is what I call acquiring knowledge. Making better decisions is what I call wisdom, where we make better decisions. And I say better decisions, I define as decisions which increase happiness and decrease harm for the people we can influence. And so if we start from axioms and we use reasoning, and we use intuition to come up with those axioms, because we have to use intuition. We can't use reasoning to come up with axioms, because you can't use logic to come up with an assumption. You have to start with some assumptions in order for logic to work. All logic requires starting from somewhere. And so you need to use intuition. Like without intuition, it's like trying to build a second floor of a house without a first floor. How do you build a second floor of a house with no first floor? And the axioms are the first floor of the logical house. The second floor of the house are where you're starting to use logic to build up an argument. And so I would argue you always need to use intuition, even if you're going to use reason at some level. So this is just a quick summary slide of when to use intuition or reason. I think I have two summary slides in this pitch because I did this deck twice and I combined them. Intuition is good for low stakes decisions or for more serious decisions where you're an expert. It considers a lot of factors without transparency. You don't understand necessarily why you're making the decision, which can be a little scary for some until you learn to build up your trust in your gut instinct. And for those of us that are experts in an industry and have many years of experience, I can make a lot of gut decisions about technology that are highly accurate, but I built up my trust in that decisioning after, learning when I succeeded and when I failed and how much could I trust my gut. And so when you're an expert in an area and you build up your trust in your intuition, you start to be able to rely on it more. Now, it can result in inconsistent decisions, which can cause cognitive dissonance. So you want to be, using it for coming up with axioms for big decisions and making quick, low stakes decisions, or even quick, high stakes decisions where you're forced into making a quick decision, which, by the way, if someone tries to force you into making a big decision, resist that at all costs. If a sales guy comes to your house and says, here's a $5,000 water purification system, and you only get this $5,000 deal if you decide within the next hour to buy it, and if I leave, it's going to be $6,000 the next time that I come back here, then you want to walk away from that, as quick as you can, because anyone that's trying to pressure you to make a decision probably doesn't want you to make the best decision. Always better to do your research and make comparisons with and ground yourself in an area that you don't know well. By the way, someone did try to do that to me with the water filter. He even put dye in a test, and it was actually a Home Depot guy too, which really surprised me that they would use such sleazy tactics. But he even put dye in a thing to say that my water was horribly, horribly bad, and tried to pressure sale me. But I'm sales trained, so that didn't really work on me. So you want to be sure you're not emotional when making an intuitive decision. Same thing with a reason-based decision. Don't be emotional when you're making them. We do use intuition to come up with axioms when we're making reason-based decisions. And then we want to use logic and reasoning from those axioms slowly and carefully, and come up with consistent beliefs that, draw on our existing knowledge, and that reduces cognitive dissonance. Great, reason-based decisions are great for high-stakes decisions worth thinking through carefully. Low-stakes decisions aren't usually worth spending the time to reason. If you find yourself spinning your wheels on a reason-based decision and thinking and overthinking it, and it's like really not that big a decision anyway, just use your intuition, like cut it out. Like you don't want to spin your wheels on something that's a low stakes decision. It's not a good use of your time. You want to spend your time on the high stakes decisions. So that's really the end of the presentation. So a little less than 30 minutes. So we'll have plenty of time for chat. I did have a couple of questions that I heard in the social session. And so the first one is reasoning from a Myers-Briggs perspective, sensing or intuitive. I don't think that reason and intuition, like intuition, the way that I defined it here is a little different than a Myers-Briggs intuitive. A Myers-Briggs intuitive is connecting a lot of dots and putting together the pieces, whereas a Myers-Briggs sensing person is a very sequential thinker. And so neither one of them is either using intuition versus logic more or less than another. And so I don't think that you can draw a really clear parallel between Myers-Briggs intuition versus Myers-Briggs sensing and using intuitive decision-making versus using reason-based decision-making. I haven't seen it studied, and I'm very open to being wrong about that if anyone wants to Google it and try to find a study on it. There might be some correlation, but I don't think by definition that there's a real relationship there. I think they're just intuition and Myers-Briggs intuitive have a very similar name, but I don't think they ultimately have the same definition, if you will. The other one is that someone said sometimes I use intuition to give me an answer and I use reason to back it up. There's a guy named Jonathan Haidt who says that we all make emotional decisions and then use reason to back them up. I would argue Jonathan Haidt probably does that. Some of us actually really do make sound reason-based decisions from the ground up. Maybe we're a minority, but I don't even think we are that small of a minority. But I do think that it's very possible to make an intuitive decision, even about an area that we don't know a lot about, and then use reason to back it up. What I think we have to be careful of is our own confirmation bias. And we had another talk about confirmation bias in the past couple of weeks. And so if you have a decision that or a conclusion you've come to intuitively, and then you're backing it up with logic, you just have to be very open-minded that your logic may not actually back up your intuitive conclusion. And as long as you keep that humility to know that your intuition may be wrong and that following reason wherever it leads, is the better choice, then I think totally fine to use intuition to make a decision or to come to a conclusion, then back it up with logic afterward. But follow the logic wherever it goes. Unless like you have a really bad feeling about something, like then I'm a big believer in trusting your gut. In general, unless you think it's gonna that decision is gonna lead to a really bad outcome, like usually it won't. But there's a certain sense of trusting your gut. The few times that I didn't trust my gut in big decisions, I later regretted it when I had a strong gut feel about something. And then is reason or intuition a gradient? I don't think it's a gradient. I think they're like interlocking chain links, right? Where the intuition is the underlying assumptions, and then reason is building a tall tower. And where you've already built a set of knowledge, you already have a lattice, you already have a 6-story building built with your expertise, you can kind of jump straight in an elevator up to the 6th floor with intuition because you already have that groundwork laid. And because you've already laid that groundwork, you can jump ahead in places that other people couldn't. And so that's kind of the way that I would look at it, is that it's not really, and to be fair, like there's a little bit of reason that you have to use with your intuition, because you don't want to come up with crazy axioms or crazy assumptions, right? You don't want these outlandish assumptions that like, I had someone tell me about my free will paper. How do we know that aliens didn't implant us with a device that makes us think we have free will when really we don't have free will? Now that's such an outlandish assumption. Now maybe it's true, like I think aliens most likely exist, but to think that, if they do exist, which I think they probably do, they're probably so much more advanced than us. To think that that's what they want to spend their time on seems pretty unfathomable to me. So, I would say we have to be careful and use our intuition to make safe assumptions and come up with safe axioms rather than outlandish axioms. And there's a degree of applying reason, even in our use of intuition, to come up with axioms to make sure that our axioms are reasonable and that our intuition makes sense. That's part of, having a gut feel that, feels right. Like the axiom should feel really solid. Like no one should be able to dispute an axiom. Like if you're going to say this is an axiom, there should be no perspective from which someone can go, oh no, I don't agree with that, right? Like an axiom should be more or less indisputable. And then the next one was, what does intuition take into account? I think it definitely takes into account our expert knowledge, like we've talked about. And then I would argue, and this is where I'm going to sort of build on top of what David said, is that I would argue that it is possible that we have some spiritual knowledge that gets taken into account in our intuition as well. I would say I've had some gut instincts that seemed counterintuitive with me, and I went with the reason-based approach at that time in my life, even though I had a strong gut feel to do something different. And I ended up later regretting not trusting my gut. And you even see, Jack Welch, while I disagree with him on certain things, he ran GE through like a very prosperous time and was a very accomplished business leader and had a lot of positive attributes. And he wrote a book about how a lot of his success was based on learning to trust his gut. And I forget what the book is called, but I think it even has gut in the name of the title. And so, even like very accomplished business leaders talk about trusting your gut and building up that trust in your sense of intuition. So I don't mean to discount that, but I'd argue for the big decisions, I think logic is, and reason is generally a better way to go. Unless you have a really strong, clear feel on gut read, in which case, if you're not emotional, maybe that's a good way to go too. So not giving a super clear one size fits all answer, but hopefully more a paradigm for when to use which and how the two are complementary. And now I want to take questions and open it up for discussion, alternative opinions, whatever people want to say and talk about. The first person with their hand up was Janet.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great review of some of the aspects of the way the mind works and how we might move ahead with trying to make a decision or looking back on, was that the right one? But my question, and it came up, I don't know, 2/3 the way through your talking, that people have assumptions, and I guess their way of making something logical that are false. So for instance, based on some of the political ideology where, it's a-okay to keep one particular group at bay, or even to harm them, to make a decision based on their own gradually increasing logic that, this is okay, this is what we're supposed to do. So it just came to my mind at the time you were talking that it's very possible people build up a sense of logic or, their way of defining how to move ahead based on false assumptions. And it's very, I guess that's where I fall back on trusting intuition, because I think I think we are spiritual beings too. And if we trust that more so in terms of like caring for one another, we wouldn't allow that progression of judgment or like, I don't know. I think our ability to make sense of the world is more based upon goodness. And then if we choose to maybe choose an ideology that keeps one particular group away or at the borderline, that can be based upon a very clear ideology, or as you put it, idiom, where you say this, therefore that. I don't mean to take up so much time. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, normally we try to keep it to one comment. I forgot to say this in the beginning. We try to keep it to one comment or one question. That keeps it under 3 minutes per hand raise. And if you have more than one, just drop your hand and raise it again. But good point, Janet. And I think the key thing that you said that I think is great to call attention to is some people make bad decisions based on false assumptions. They also make you suggested intuition is the way to get around that, but I would argue some people make bad decisions claiming that they're intuitive decisions as well. And so I don't think you can get around that just by making intuitive decisions. I think the way you get around that is by being really honest with yourself about what your assumptions are and sticking to assumptions that are really sound, and then always keeping a humility about you that says, if I learn new information that proves some of my confirmation bias is wrong, some of my pre-existing beliefs are wrong, having the humility to say, I was wrong about that, and not succumbing to confirmation bias. We all have confirmation bias, whether we like it or not. Being aware of it and combating it consciously and intentionally, being vigilant to look for reasons that you're wrong is, not to drive yourself crazy, but you're probably more likely most people are on the other side of that, where you want to be looking for reasons that you're wrong and be open to those ideas, because most people shut those ideas that are disagreeing with their current beliefs out without even considering them.
Very true. Humility, I think, is the answer there. Thank you.
You're welcome. Nicholas.
Yes, I'm wondering about I've always lived with the assumption that I have very little, if any, intuition at all. And even if I did, I doubt I have very good reason to doubt that I have any ability to get in touch with it. So my question is it possible to even consciously try to reach it to it?
Yeah, so I would argue that, let me ask a question before I say this. When you were younger, do you remember having a gut instinct that something was a better or worse decision more frequently than you do now?
Nope, I don't believe I recall any such moments.
Okay. I will tell you for myself, I definitely did feel that when I was younger. And then when I got into my 20s, I was ignoring those gut instincts. And the more that you ignore them, the quieter that voice gets. If you think about it from a Looney Tunes perspective, to use a silly comparison, but it's a really accurate one, I think, is in Looney Tunes, they have a little angel on one side and a little devil on the other side. And, they both say something, and the character gets to decide which one to listen to. If you stop listening to one and you keep batting them away, they stop speaking up. And that's true about people in your life as well. If people who tell you you're wrong, even when they actually have a good reason to tell you you're wrong, if you beat them up for doing that, they're going to stop telling you you're wrong, and they're going to let you be. And then you're going to learn less often when you're wrong. And so I would argue that your voice of intuition is probably quieter right now than it has been. And what I would encourage you to do is to actively pay attention to it and think about, what is my intuition telling me, especially about areas where you're an expert, and then make whatever decision you're going to make, but track and maybe even keep a journal about whether that thing worked out for you or not. And was the intuitive decision the better decision for you? And if you start to see that the intuitive decisions were actually better decisions than the ones you ended up making with reason, then you may start to, trust your gut a little bit more. Now, you do have to keep away from the emotional decisions, because that's going to conflate things, where you're going to be comparing emotional decisions to reason-based decisions instead of intuitive decisions. Does that make sense, Nicholas?
Let's just pretend I didn't, just for the sake of clarity.
That you didn't understand what I said?
I only heard, I was able to hear it very well, but I doubt I had a perfectly good understanding.
We just had a presentation on Wittgenstein by Remco, and what he talked about is how we never have a perfect understanding, no matter who says what. But as long as you got the general gist, and I'll reiterate it quickly, but I don't want to go through it all in detail again. Think about, listen to your intuitive, gut instinct on a decision, and then write down what your gut says, and then write down what decision you made, and write down how that decision you made worked out, and try to track whether or not your gut is leading you in the right direction. And if it leads you in better directions than the decisions you've been making, you may learn to rely on it a little bit more.
Then a good question. Then I guess the first step I need to do is how to start getting back in touch with it.
It's to ask yourself what, when you're not thinking emotionally, what is your inclination about, if you just sort of say, what do I think is the right answer before you reason through the whole thing? What do you think is the right answer? And then reason through the whole thing and say, what conclusion do you come to?
I see. So I should try that. I think I get what you mean.
Write down what your inclination is before you reason through it, and then write down your inclination after reasoning through it, and see over time which decision-making process works better for which type of questions. And I think you'll find that your intuition in areas that you're an expert will generally make a better decision. And I think you'll also find that where your gut instinct, as you listen to it more often, where it has a very loud opinion, which it doesn't for you right now, but I think if you start listening to it a little more, it will sometimes have a loud opinion. And when it has a very loud opinion, I think you'll find that it actually is more accurate.
Well, the thing is, does autism have an effect on it?
I don't know about that, Nicholas. I'm sorry.
That's what I have to keep in mind. The fact that my autism already has a bad enough effect on me on a daily basis. So I'm starting to wonder, can it affect my own intuition?
It may affect it, but it's not going to eliminate it, Nicholas. So I would encourage you to just track your intuitive, your gut feel, and track the decisions you make, along with how strong your gut feel is about that decision, and see what happens.
I see.
And I want to let MJ go next, because we have a lot of hands up.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, MJ. You're on mute, by the way.
I'm so sorry. I lowered my hand, but I didn't press on the button. So thank you. Great presentation. It's interesting because what I had is basically a segue between what Nicholas and Janet had to say, just I guess as extra things to think about. Because when it comes to, in my current understanding and opinion, when it comes to reasoning, there's a danger of us being able to reason our way through pretty much anything. So doing that on a constant basis, it can lead to like analysis paralysis. And it also was, when you look at the history in the past, there's a lot of reasoning that was made on like groups of people and stuff like that were not good, but because of the fact that there was a reason behind it, people acted in a certain way that we wouldn't act today. And when it comes to intuition, I think a lot of people are not self-aware. Self-awareness is very important when it comes to be able to hear your like to know what's your inner voice, your intuition. If you're not self-aware and you're kind of just going through life repeating what's been told as opposed to listening to your inner voice, that's probably one of the reasons why not everybody know if they're listening to their intuition or not. So being self-aware, I think, is super important before even knowing how to listen to our intuition, because sometimes it might be, like you said, fear or any other emotion instead of intuition. So those are the thoughts that I just wanted to share that might be good for discussion.
So I'm going to see if I understood the second one right. I think I did, but I want to confirm. So the first one is that we can suffer from analysis paralysis. I agree. I would argue that usually comes from over reasoning, which means reasoning either too much about small decisions or reasoning through larger decisions so much that we haven't found anything new to consider about that decision for a long time, but we still continue to reason about it. And at that point, it's like trying to pick fruit from a bare tree, right? Like you've already picked all the fruit, you know, like you've already gotten everything there is to know about reasoning through this decision. At that point, you need to make the decision, move forward and move on. And so that's the first one. And then the second one is, I think being self-aware is very important. And if I understood you right, you were saying that we're kind of taught to follow so much that we sometimes lose touch with our intuition because we're following the authorities and what they tell us to think. And the truth is our education system was built to train factory workers. That's where the origins of, you know, rote memorization and the modern US educational system come from. Most of the actually global education system is very similar, quite frankly, from the Industrial Revolution. And we're not taught to be critical thinkers. And that's part of why I founded the Free Thinker Institute, is to teach people the critical thinking skills so we can reclaim our own minds and think for ourselves and not blindly trust authority. And, you know, half of society trusts one authority in the US and the other half seems to trust another authority. And then there's the small number of us independents in the middle that are like, no, you should all think for yourselves. And I really think that we should all think for ourselves. And, you know, we'll find that one of those halves thinks more for themselves than the other, but they both ultimately trust authority, in my opinion, far too much. And so there have been examples of many examples throughout history of common people challenging authority that have literally stopped, you know, the end of humanity as we know it. A low-level Russian official decided not to launch nuclear weapons against the US when the US launched nuclear weapons against Russia. Don't remember the US launching nuclear weapons against Russia? That's because we never did. There was a faulty system in Russia that made them think we launched nuclear weapons to them. And this guy goes, I don't think they would do that. And so he just defied the orders of the Kremlin and said, I'm not going to counter launch our nuclear weapons. And that low-level Russian employee basically stopped a nuclear holocaust. And so there have been other examples, you know, throughout history of common people using their good sense to challenge authority to great ends. And I think we need more of that, not less of it. It's just that those of us that think for ourselves are harder to rule than people who follow blindly. And so I'd argue that's another good reason for us to think for ourselves. That said, Christine, go ahead.
I was listening and I was making a list of decisions where what you're talking about might really come into play. And one of them was jobs and marriage and buying a house. And I really picked up on the speaker the person who was talking about their dog. And so that is, it resonates with the decision that I came here for, to get a little bit of insight on. And as I plan for my retirement, I'm trying to decide whether I should buy a horse. I've always wanted a horse. Horses are a lot of fun and they are just huge money pits. They are just, you're throwing, there's a little saying, roses are red, violets are blue, my pony eats my money and turns it to poo, right? Right? I mean, that's a horse, right? Yeah. So what I'm going to do, so I want to keep both aspects. I want to get comfortable in the dissonance, in the cognitive dissonance, right? It can be a very emotional decision, a very impulsive decision. I've seen it at horse auctions. And yet I have a finance degree. And my finance degree has taught me the first thing you do is a cost analysis. And in doing a cost analysis, I discovered that when you get a horse, there's some people who don't know what they're doing and they buy a horse and they have to get everything new. And that is incredibly, incredibly expensive. If you make friends, it's less, right? And so this is sort of the decision between, you know, adopting a dog, right? You go in the animal shelter and you're walking through the shelter things and you're going, okay, do I want this one? Do I want that one? And it's a little bit of both, right? You're using both principles to make your decision. You like the look of this one. Oh, he's so cute. I want to take him home. Then you realize he weighs 150 pounds and you're going to have to buy dog food for that, right? And vet bills. You're not going to get just little dosages of medicine. You're going to have to buy a lot of medicine. And so I think it's very useful. And this is what I'm going to continue doing as a result of listening to this presentation, is ladder it. I'm going to use my intuition and see if there's another way, and then do a cost analysis, that very sensing-based, rational, nuts and bolts thing. And I have 5 years to make up my mind, and I'm going to use this, and I'm going to get closer to what I want. And at some point, I will, just bite the bullet and buy the horse. Or not, right? Maybe I won't ever run into the horse, but that's what I'm going to do. And so my decision is not to choose either intuition or a rational approach, but both. I want to use both. It has to pass the acid test on both levels. It has to make me happy, and it's got to make sense.
I think that's really smart. I think if you run the numbers and say, what would it cost and can I afford it? If you simply can't afford it and be able to retire in comfort, you have to rule it out, because you don't want to end up, in a retirement home that has horrible health care because you bought a horse, right?
Right,
right. You also, I don't know if you're aware, but some places do fractional rental of a horse, where you can buy a piece of a horse and you get it for a certain amount of time, and you're sharing that expense, just like they do with airplanes. They have fractional rentals of airplanes. You can do the same thing with a horse. My kids take horseback riding lessons, and that was one of the things they offered for us. So there are other alternatives that might be more affordable if you can't afford to have one on your own, or you don't think you're going to ride often enough. If you have a horse, you have to ride it often enough that you keep it in good shape. And that's already a chore. Although if you're retired, you probably have the time to do that. But you also have to keep in mind that riding a horse is more dangerous than riding a motorcycle. And so, there's a lot of factors to take into consideration. It is nice to do as a pastime, but you're smart to be thinking of all the factors. And I think you're smart to put them all down on a spreadsheet, since you're a finance person like I am, and then make a gut decision about whether or not it's worth it or not.
I really enjoyed this presentation. It was good. It got my mind thinking.
Good. I'm glad. That's what we try to do, is get people thinking about stuff that we don't often think about in day-to-day life. But for those of us that come here, we like these intellectually interesting ideas. So that's it. I need to step away for 1 second. So I'm going to let Will, do you mind? Will stepped away too. I'm going to let Jan go next, and I'll probably hear you from the other room. I'll be right back.
Okay, thank you, Garrett. This is really interesting, and I'm really impressed with your knowledge of this subject and the way you have presented a lot of information very clearly. My take on this is that for decades, I've wondered how so many people jump to really inaccurate conclusions about people and situations. And I was just mystified that they were often so wrong. And then about 8 or 10 years ago, I started reading about cognitive fallacies, and one of the best known ones, which Garrett has mentioned this evening, is confirmation bias. And closely related to that is the fundamental attributional error, which I love to say, it's kind of fun to say, but a fundamental attributional error briefly is, if I screw up, it's because maybe I had a headache, or I didn't sleep well the night before. If you screw up, it's because you're stupid. So that's it in brief. And when I started learning about cognitive fallacies, there are actually a couple dozen of them. I've read many, many books about cognitive fallacies. It explained so much of what I'd seen in people coming to the wrong conclusions. And it kind of gave me a structure for understanding where people's minds trip them up. And I've gotten to the point where, generally speaking, I have a deep distrust of anyone now who, particularly if they yammer on and on about it, talking about how they trust their gut and they trust their intuition and they're always right. Because none of us, well, you can monitor yourself and reduce your errors, but generally you're not going to be able to distinguish your hopes and fears from your intuition. So you could be completely blind to something and convinced that you're right. And I think it's much healthier to just question yourself. And it's funny how people can think you're insecure. People sometimes think, I doubt myself. I've got a pretty darn high opinion of myself, but I also know enough to watch for my thinking errors. And the trouble with, well, the challenge of confirmation bias is that too few people are watching out for it. They come to a decision and they just don't look at anything after that because, you know, they think they're right, they trust their gut, and they're not on the alert for any subsequent information. So I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, that really good points. And that's a lot of what we talked about in the confirmation bias topic, is that too many people are mired in confirmation bias. And I have a joke that I say with my company is that I don't hire perfect people at Plate Rate, because perfect people are just as flawed as the day that they started thinking they were perfect, because they haven't learned anything since then. And so actually perfect people are the most flawed people on earth most of the time. And so that's to your point about the people who think that they're always right. Anyone who thinks they're always right is probably wrong more often than those of us who admit when we're wrong very readily, because we're learning from our mistakes and they're not. And so I think it's really good to be willing to admit we're wrong. And I think it's great, Jan, that you have that high sense of self-confidence, but are also open to being wrong and looking for the reasons you're wrong. That's exactly where I see myself. And I think, you know, helping other people get to that point is a really, you know, good service to individuals that we can help infuse with that mindset where, yes, be proud of yourself, but also have the humility to accept when you're wrong. Remco, how are you? Good to see you.
Yeah, hi Garrett, and good on you for taking this important topic on. And I don't know quite where to start here, but well, one thing I rather, as a starting point, Albert Einstein said, and you know, he's known for physics, but he was also quite a philosopher, and he was a very insightful philosopher. And one of the things he said about the intuition was this: he said, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. Now, I like that up to a point. I think we need to, how can I say? I would rather see the word intuition dropped. There's no need for the word. It's a redundant word. It's a word that describes our natural being. I think it's generally agreed with authors like Daniel Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, like Ian McGilchrist, who wrote The Master and the Emissary, and more recently, The Matter of Things, which are both extraordinary books, by the way. Both of them don't so much talk about intuition at all. Both of those, one is a psychologist, the first, and the second is a psychiatrist. They talk about a system. Daniel Kahneman talks about a system one. That is the unconscious self, right? And the conversation that I've heard, and good on you, Garrett, for putting the Myers-Briggs into place, because I have a great concern. Now, I think it's a bit of a crock, actually. I think it's something that you know, they inherited from the Jungian concept. And look, you know, talk about the intuitive and the sensing. That's bull. You know, it's totally redundant. It's asking you to reflect on yourself as if you can describe yourself. Getting back to Kahneman, Kahneman makes the point clear that our system one, our predominant self, who we are, is invisible. We have no awareness of it. It happens, and it's the predominant processing. McGilchrist says the same thing. He uses the bicameral mind, and it's the right brain that does all the processing for us, and we want to label that intuitive. It's redundant. It's a nonsense. It's not only nonsense, it's dangerous. I suggest to say I'm calling on my intuition, and therefore to elevate it above the rational is not a good way to have a conversation, I suggest, with yourself. I'm much more aligned with Kahneman, much more aligned with McGilchrist, and to say that what happens, and let's take McGilchrist here, what happens, that if you have a problem, if you have something like the lady who was talking about her horse, you will pass it over to the rational. You will pass it over to your system 2, or you will pass it over to your left brain in the Gilchrist concept. And you will consider it. You will consciously consider it. And then what should happen is that it then passed back to your system 1, or if you like, what I prefer, the right brain for integration. That doesn't always happen. You can be trapped by the rational. You can be trapped by your left brain. And the left brain is so powerful. It's like the Berlusconi and also Trump. They are masters of using simple concepts, simple words. They do a dump. It makes sense. It is out of context. And that's why I have such a strong view about not using intuition. Because if you do that, you trap yourself. You can be confusing your subconscious. And besides, think of, and I'm going to conclude with that. Think of, did anybody watch the Man Who Knew Infinity? Remember Ramanujan? Ramanujan was an amazing mathematician, extraordinary man. And he came up with these extraordinary, complex, rational things. And he assigned it to the gods. I would suggest he came out of this, what you would want to call the intuitive, the right brain, or if you like, your system 1. So I'm saying, look, forget the intuitive. Just be with the fact that there is a conscious side to you, and there is the predominant 95% or more subconscious that's processing, and to learn to trust it in the way I'm concluding with that, what Einstein said. The rational mind is a faithful servant. Take that, but be always allowed to be integrated into your into your full right brain or system 1. Anyway, I don't know whether I made sense here, but I really, I'll conclude with that.
Thanks, Remco. Yeah, by the way, I wasn't saying, I guess I will part ways with you. I wasn't saying that the Myers-Briggs is totally irrelevant. I just don't think that the Myers-Briggs definition of intuitive is the same as intuition. I actually got trained in Myers-Briggs at GE about how to use it in terms of presenting to leadership, understanding how to interact with other colleagues, knowing what their proclivities are and what their preferences are. Mi amor, papi está trabajando. Sorry, my daughter wants a little daddy time. So I do think that it's a very valuable tool, and it does a good job of recognizing people's natural inclinations, which help you understand how to work with someone in the way that they like to be worked with, rather than working with them the way that we naturally like to be worked with ourselves, which is what most people do. Is most people treat other people the way they want to be treated, which is the golden rule. But the truth is, I like the platinum rule, which is to treat other people the way they want to be treated, which is, if you learn the Myers-Briggs and you learn to use it effectively, you treat people the way they want to be treated rather than the way that you want to be treated, which is not how everyone else wants to be treated all the time. That said, we have a lot of hands up, so I want to let David R. go.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, I have 2 points. When you said you start off with intuition and then you apply reason to analyze, I think we really start off with observation. Young children have intuition that if you walk behind something and they can't see you, they think you've actually disappeared, rather than the fact that you've just gone behind something. And gradually, as we grow up, through observation of the world around us, we learn how, at least we become more accurate in the way it works. And so I think you start off with observation rather than intuition. And from observation, you work up through reason to skill, a skill that, or an expertise that becomes so ingrained that you do most of the processing, like the fellow just before me said something about subconscious 95%. And I think because we're doing a lot of the analysis subconsciously, it feels like what you would quote call intuition, but I would just say it's a subconscious skill that you've learned through applying yourself repeatedly in whatever situation it is that you're analyzing. So you stated at one point, intuition where you are an expert is good intuition. I would argue, forget the word intuition and just say you're an expert, and subconsciously you do the analysis, so you don't have to labor through it like you would say the first time you have to analyze a situation. Once you've analyzed it 100 times or 200 times, you don't even have to think about it. It's like driving a car. When you first start driving a car, you have to really focus on steering, brakes, and all the rest. By the time you've been driving for a few years, you can, you're listening to the radio, carrying on a conversation with somebody and watching, a YouTube video while you're driving, and somehow the car gets home. So I just don't think the term intuition helps anything, much like the fellow just before me said, but that's my take. Thank you.
The idea of intuition is to say that it's believing something without conscious reasoning. That's what intuition means. And so if you look at axioms, David, like, how do you defend an axiom, without intuition?
Well, I think axioms are basically assumptions, but they're a set of assumptions that form the basis for some sort of a system of analysis. That's what I think an axiom is. So there's nothing magical about axioms. There's nothing magical about assumptions. And I just don't think there's anything the least bit mystical about intuition. I think, as a fellow before me said, whatever subconscious processes are going on in your brain, you're not aware of. And so you can sort of be a little bit surprised how you come up with some idea that seems really accurate. And so, the temptation is to say it's some sort of intuition I have, but I would just argue it's some subconscious ability that you have obtained through observation and repetition.
So it sounds to me like that's what you would describe as intuition, but even what you're just describing, it's making a decision without conscious reasoning, which is the very definition of intuition. So I think we're getting semantic here, which I don't want to do, but I find it interesting that people don't like the definition or the use of the term intuition, but I haven't heard a reason of disagreeing with the definition yet. And
I would tell you why.
Yeah.
I could quickly say why people dislike the intuition, because there's an implication using the term that it's more than what your brain just does in a rote or in a natural way.
I don't think there's anything in the definition that says that there's more than what the brain does. I think that's left to the reader to decide whether or not it is more. Now, I would argue that it is more, but I wouldn't expect to convince you of that tonight, David.
No, but that's why you wondered how come people don't like the term, and I think the reason is, I guess, people who are materialists or who are physicalists or whatever just think it has a mystical undertone, the word intuition.
Yeah, I don't think that's intended in the term. At least it's not when I use it, even though I believe that it has one. I perfectly agree that the term can be used without having a mystical undertone, using physical processes only. It's still a very meaningful term. But I think we're getting semantics, so I want to let Ella go next.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yes, I just had a couple of thoughts. Yeah. Okay. So a lot of good comments. It's really interesting to see so many people that are thinking and reasoning and here together, and I like that idea. So my thoughts are, whenever you let someone interpret a situation or the nature of reality for you, or a group of people who have undue influence, or perhaps it's one person in a relationship that has undue influence over the way you think or behave or judge a situation. I think it's not a good situation. I think we do have to be aware of those things. And I think in today's world, with the media such as it is, and everybody being on automatic feeds and social media, and the news being very, very biased, you know, depending which channel you choose, it's going to be biased one way or the other. How do you, and by the way, you know, you can do this through a cult, you know, cults. You can do this through just being sort of passive in your way of being and letting other people influence you unduly. But you know, it's coming at us from all directions. So if we realize we already have an unconscious that's been mentioned numerous times here, that's operating, that we're not always aware of and does come out in our behavior. So we've got that to contend with. We've got the fact that we're just not always conscious, or nor are we able to interpret reality. By definition, we don't know the answers to so many questions about the nature of reality, nor what may we ever. So there's all these unknowns, and yet we're hit with a situation, and you know, not hit with it, but we're in a situation in the environment. We have to make a decision. We have to make some thoughts about it at the very least. We have all this previous conditioning that is embedded within that, for that thought and that perception. So, and then we've got the media sort of, you know, coming at us. We have to, I don't know, I just think trying to be as objective and thoughtful and reflective and do the research ourselves might lend us closer to the truth. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's exactly what we're trying to create, a community of people who are objective, thoughtful, you know, seeking truth rather than seeking to be right, and doing the research ourselves, but also knowing when to rely on experts for facts, right? If you have a large network of people that come up with consistent answers, and it would be this ridiculously huge conspiracy for them to all be lying about the same thing, well, maybe it's more likely that they're actually right, rather than that all of them are lying about the same thing that they have no motivation to lie about, right? And so,
well, but they can be biased as well. So, and with so much research is so readily available, why, if they give you a statistic or a fact that this is going on in society based on blah, 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 you can readily research that and find out the opposite opinion, contrary supporting opinions. Why would you just base your life on what one group of people?
But take an extreme example, right? You know, flat earthers, right? They argue that, look at the earth, it's flat. You can see it plain and simple. The earth is flat. But the level of conspiracy that would have to exist for earth to be flat, like everybody that flies in an airplane and, you know, navigates an airplane would have to be in on that conspiracy. And what motivation do they have to hide the fact that earth is flat, right? Where are the pictures of the ends of the earth? So some things are just so incontrovertibly true, you know. And we did a session on coronavirus vaccines, and I basically showed the global statistics on coronavirus and showed that in order for coronavirus vaccines to not be effective, you would have to have a global conspiracy across pretty much all countries in the world would have to have it, you know, other than maybe North Korea, who clearly doesn't have accurate statistics about coronavirus because they have 5 deaths for one infection based on coronavirus. 5 people die of coronavirus for one person who gets infected by coronavirus. Clearly something is wrong there. And that is, they don't want to admit how many people are getting infected by coronavirus. So, and they can't hide the deaths from international onlookers. So, so there are certain things that are just so unlikely to be large groups of people hiding conspiracies. And there are also people who propagate falsehoods to communities where they know that they can get blind loyalty from people who are not going to look at, you know, outside of their confirmation bias, and are going to look to further their confirmation bias. And I think we have to be cautious of those people as well. So All I'm saying is
those people are on both sides.
they are on both sides.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's my point, is that, you know, don't, you know, whatever your inclinations are or my inclinations are, just be aware, do your own research, you know, and make your own decisions based on your own ethics.
Right. But also I think it's important to hone your critical thinking skills and learn what sources you can trust and which ones you can't, because there are a lot of untrustworthy sources. I would argue there are more untrustworthy sources of information now with the advent of the internet than there ever were historically. Even though I'm very prone to challenging authority, authority did a good job of, you know, keeping less misinformation into the mainstream prior to the advent of the internet. And with the advent of the internet, right, flat earthers didn't exist before the internet, right? So it was only once you could put a flat earther video on YouTube that you got 300,000 Americans thinking that Earth is flat. And so misinformation travels very easily and widely, and people stay in echo chambers. And I think it's important that we get out of those echo chambers and listen to people from, you know, with other perspectives. And that said, we have a lot of hands up, so I want to let Sean go.
Intuition and reasoning is a mental process, help us to make a decision. I would argue we should use reasoning first if the circumstances or time is allowed, because very often intuition may lead to tragedy or disasters. Very good example is a police officer, because of their job, because so we have so many guns on the street, they don't have time to reason, right? They have to react. Unfortunately, very often, you know, police officers' intuition turned into tragedy. Of course, this is why I say all citizens, right? We should try to cooperate. You know, if police officer try to stop you, don't try to run away or resist. That's bad. Okay, my experience tell me, right? I started drive May 1988. Okay, because my first car, of course, I remember. Not a single time I found a police officer rude to me. I found they are very professional. Okay, I probably caught it because of speeding, failed stop at stop sign, probably 10 times. Actually, half of the times, right? They only give me a warning instead of a ticket. I contribute that to my attitude, my reaction to police officers. For example, if I saw the flashlight, I pull off right away. Roll down my window, put my hand on the steering wheel. Police officer walked to me. First, I said, "Sorry, sir, I made a mistake. I did not keep my eye on speedometer all the times." Okay, just right away disarm police officer. You know, we're human beings. If you resist, so make situation bad. Another thing is about the intuition is so intuition make decision based on intuition is not good, because although we have a confirmation bias, subconscious bias, so intuition make decision based on the intuition may be not a good choice. Okay, I would say intuition backed up by reasoning, that is the best solution. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sean. Appreciate it. Al.
All right, so I may have a bit of a rebuttal against most people with what they're saying, because I think what's happening is our definition of intuition is kind of getting a little iffy, only because, like what Sean just described with the cops, I believe that's instinct, and that's a little different. That's a whole other conversation. But I think to go backwards with intuition specifically, if you ever, if anybody ever practiced meditation, it's basically you go in a place where it's beyond reason and beyond even feelings. So I love that you touched on, yes, don't go in your feelings, because a lot of people misconstrue intuition with feelings. And it's not that, it's a space of beyond that. And it's like an inner knowing, like you just kind of, you know, it's an inner knowing. That's the best way I can describe it. And I think that that gets misconstrued because I don't think a lot of people necessarily go to that place or have a space in their lifestyle or their thing to meditate regularly or, you know, practice this. Everybody's got lives and jobs and responsibilities. So it's, you kind of just kind of going through the flow of life. And I have a bit of a rebuttal because in the presentation, it's said about how when you use intuition, you use it for like, either you're an expert in an area or use it for like quicker decisions, not so much for bigger decisions. And I would say, I would add to that I would use it for bigger decisions in life, only because if it's beyond, if it comes from this space of an inner knowing, I come from the belief, I'm not religious in any way, but I do believe I am a bit more spiritual. So that's kind of like the framework I'm using when I'm describing these things. So I do believe that we're kind of like spiritual beings having this human experience. And so when making bigger decisions in life, I feel like sometimes even you should use both reason and intuition, but with reason specifically, I find that it's sometimes quite limited. Like you only know what you know today. You don't know, maybe sometimes you even have limited information. There's times in my life where I can backtrack and I've made perfectly logical decisions and they made very much a lot of sense at the time. But inside, internally, with that inner knowing, I felt like it was wrong. And then when you look back, you know, you go through it, you look back and you're like, aha, I didn't know that then. My reason could not have deduced that at that point of time. Now I know because I have more information. But I think for that reason itself is kind of limited. We can only know what we know today. And historically, if you kind of look at, you know, life, it's how things have happened. Very often, a lot of inventions, a lot of, you know, big things have kind of been invented. And if with the information they had at hand at that time, even like pre-technology, for example, like it would have not made any sense that we'd have what we do have today. There's a lot of things invented that just, like if they just followed reason entirely, it would have not made any sense. Everybody else would have thought they were crazy for even attempting such a thing. But then they attempted it, figured it out, and maybe something else helped them along the way. But I think with intuition specifically, it does get the definition does get misconstrued because I think it can be used for bigger life decisions as well. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. I didn't write it in the slides, but I did verbally mention that, you know, for myself, I've had strong gut feelings that I didn't listen to. And when I didn't listen to them, my gut spoke to me less loudly in the future. And when I started listening to them, it spoke more loudly to me in the future. And when I didn't listen to those strong gut feelings, I found in retrospect, I was making bad decisions. And I'm like, oh my God, I should have followed my gut on that one. And so I do think that if your gut has a strong opinion, sometimes it makes sense to use the intuition rather than the reason. But I can't rationally justify that. All I can do is say, that's been my life experience. And I would encourage other people to pay attention to whether or not that's true for them. Because I'm not going to say I can logically defend something when I can't. For me, that's a spiritual belief. What I can back with science is the fact that if you're an expert, you can trust your intuition and it has a high degree of scientific certainty in being right. I can't scientifically defend trust your gut when you have a strong feeling in the gut, but I can say experientially, you know, anecdotally, that that's been the case for me. Do you see the distinction there? Is that I can say one from my own experience and I can say the other is backed by research and logic, and different arguments will be more convincing to different people.
I can see the reasoning, but I think with my version of, well, the definition of intuition, which again, it could get, different people can think of it differently, but I think it goes even beyond expertise. It's something different. And if you, it's like it's an inner knowing, like you tap into it, and it goes even beyond expertise. It's not necessarily like based on logic and what you know from like a certain field. I think that what the expertise is more related to is instinct. You develop a certain sense of instinct, when you are more of an expert in a certain field, or even a cop, your instincts to survive. So you kind of make, instant decisions, and those are based on survival. So those are more instinct rather than intuition, kind of like, animals, if you want to make that argument with like a lion has instincts to survive. So you'll do certain things to do that. But I wouldn't necessarily call it that a lion has intuition per se. But that can get iffy. It could get we could have a whole argument.
We'll save that for another night. Michael, go ahead.
I think it's very interesting to look at this whole issue of intuition versus rationalism in terms of making a decision. And the decision I'm going to consider was the ones that the Jews, the Gypsies had to make in Germany in the early days to implement and elected. Emotionally, they were feeling. They could feel the fear. Their intuition, just their immediate reaction to what was going on was something's terrible going on. We got to get out of here. But they also had an emotional attachment to Germany. They love Germany, just like Americans love Americans and so on. They like the German music, German culture, whatever, and so they would talk. They would find reasons why they should not leave, or some of them would find reasons why they would not leave Germany, and it usually revolved around, well, this is going to change. It's not going to last forever. German people are going to wake up, get tired of this guy, and throw him out. And also, actually, the prejudice against Jews before Hitler was much higher in other countries than it was in Germany. Germany was fairly low. Russia, Poland, France, England, United States, kind of everything. So now, on the other hand, take Franklin Roosevelt. Now, Franklin Roosevelt read Mein Kampf in 1932, 1933. So he knew exactly the Hitler stuff very early. And he even put together a team of German Americans to go to Germany and see if the stuff that was in Mein Kampf was actually being carried out. The team came back and said it was. So he decided then, he was very, very upset. And he was, especially about the prejudice against Jews. And but he did not act. He held back on his emotions because he knew that if he acted, if he pushed any harder than he was pushed, that he would be stopped and pushed aside. And so it wasn't until even in 1938, 1939, he was doing whatever he could to goad the Germans into attacking the United States. And it finally paid for it. But it goes to show how just how important it is to balance against each other.
Yeah, I think what you were saying is that Germans were kind of saying Nazism was going to pass by. And I do think there was a lot of sentiment of that. And I think there are a lot of people who are very conflict adverse and they don't want to cause a stir. And all I would say is that I am not conflict adverse. I try to be polite, and I think it's important to be polite, but I'm perfectly willing to challenge someone I disagree with, even if I highly respect them, because that's what those of us seeking truth do, is we work together to seek truth, and we're willing to challenge each other because we surround ourselves with people who would rather seek truth than just be right. Whereas people who are just want to live in an echo chamber, they just want to hear that their current beliefs are right. And that's a different mentality. I would argue the Allies also were conflict adverse, right? Hitler invaded multiple countries before war was declared, and they just said, "Oh, he'll just take that one, right? And we'll just let him do it, and we don't want to cause another world war." And the truth is, they were making the world war get extended by not invading Germany earlier, or not, stopping Hitler earlier by letting him grow his empire. And so sometimes, and I guess I'll just end with, in Dante's Inferno, there is a specific circle of hell for people who see bad things happen and don't do anything about it. And so I don't believe in the metaphysical hell that Dante wrote about. I think I have a different concept of hell, but I still think it's interesting that Dante said that it's very bad to see bad things happen and not stand up for those being harmed and those that are innocent. And I agree with him that we should all try to make the world a better place. And it's on each one of us to use our own judgment to see the truth as clearly as we can. And once we do that, use it to make the world a better place. And that's what the 5 intentions are intended to do in terms of guidance, which if you go to the Freethinker Institute website, you can read the 5 intentions, and we can go into them later. If people are interested, just raise your hand and ask. Nicholas, go ahead. Nicholas, are you there? You're on mute. Maybe we'll jump to Jeff because Nicholas, I think, doesn't realize that he's on mute. Go ahead, Jeff. Oh, there's Nicholas. Go ahead.
Sorry, my bad. This idea of these five things you mentioned are
the 5 intentions, yeah.
Yes. And I'm wondering about what kinds of literature you could recommend for me to read to further investigate this topic.
So the first thing I would do, the 5 intentions are actually made by me, and they're really intended to be 5 simple rules to follow to live a happy moral life. And because you're asking about them, I'm going to say what they are quickly. Is to use intuition and reason to be the best version of yourself, seek truth, and be fair. That's the first intention, and they're in priority order. The second is to share who you are and what you believe to the extent you trust someone transparently with other people, and then to also listen with an open mind to when people tell you have ideas that are not helping you, not true, or not helping you be the best version of yourself. And then the third is to hone your critical thinking skills so you can learn to rely on them. We've talked a lot about that tonight. And then the fourth, those first 3 help you see the truth more clearly and help you grow and develop as a person, and be fair. And what do we mean by being fair? We mean increasing happiness and decreasing harm for the people we can influence, which is the 4th intention. And then the 5th intention is an eagerness to give and receive love. We all want to be loved. So both romantic and platonic love, we all want to be loved. So let's give and receive love in the world. And so those are the 5 intentions. As far as literature, we're actually working on a curriculum. A colleague of mine, Neville Bush, is visiting from Australia, and he's actually working on a curriculum that grounds the 5 intentions in sort of the thoughts of historical thinkers. So stay in tune, because we will advertise that once it's ready, and there will be a lot of historical readings of historical thinkers that align with the 5 intentions in various ways. So stay tuned for that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Garrett, does Nicholas know about the website and the Discord?
Yeah, that's a great point, Will. Nicholas, you should join the Discord as well. Ellis, if you don't
I
mind
posted it
posting.
in the chat.
Perfect. So Nicholas, check out the Discord link. We have a specific channel to talk about the 5 intentions where you can ask questions. And if you want, I can post some essays I've written on each one of the 5 intentions with a vision document for the organization. If you want to learn more from about my perspective on them.
I got no. I haven't been able to develop my own perspective, so another one's to start from is good enough for me.
There you go.
It's in the chat. It's in the chat, Nicholas. The link's in the chat.
Yeah, I found it. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And let's let Jeff go. Hi, Jeff. Good to see you again.
Hey, Garrett. Hi, everyone. What a remarkable conversation this is. And Garrett, thanks for sponsoring it.
Sure.
I frankly am first of all just both surprised and pleased regarding the number of different perspectives and opinions on this subject, even at fairly fundamental levels. And it's just fascinating to notice that. With a small population of folks who would be attracted to this conversation, folks who have been somewhat reflective about it and experience that they've learned from, that the perspectives could be so different is really interesting. And I professionally do a lot of work with teams, and I've been doing that for quite a while. And one of the things that it made me think about is that while there are drawbacks to the individual orientation and there are drawbacks to team orientations, one of the benefits of a team orientation is to get the perspectives born of different vantage points. Vantage points being everything from someone's life experience to all what they've chosen to learn from it, to their training or education, their expertise, whatever. It's just there really is a benefit to getting people's perspectives from the different vantage points that each person is. And one of the challenges of it is for people to not take having people disagree with them, because they come from different vantage points and have different perspectives, all of which are partially right, to not take it personally, to not feel disrespected when somebody offers a perspective that's different from theirs, even and hangs on to it and will defend it. So that's just one thing that I thought was, I can tell you, it's just interesting to observe this conversation and see the differing vantage points. I also want to thank you, Garrett, for the amount of time that you put into these things and thinking and even writing about it, because I know that's a lot of work, and
it is.
And I really appreciate it that you do it.
Thank you for saying that, especially when I'm working plus hours a week.
You and I have never met, and I'm just I don't know, joined in, I don't know, a half dozen times in all of these over the last year or something, but I really do appreciate it. One of the things I would recommend, and then I'll be done, is that I think of all these topics, the one that is most fascinating to me is not intuition or reason. It is the axiom. That is the most fascinating topic to me, because it is my experience that people have axioms that they have chosen to base a lot of their identity and orientation and interpretation of events and what they learn from experiences, or even how they interpret the exact same information. It's the axioms that are competing here. And so this subject of competing axioms I think is very, very rich. And because I think it is right that reason is a tool, and it's great. It's a process. It's a tool. It's like a machine, and but it's based on things that can't necessarily be proven. And one of the difficulties with spending a great deal of time applying reason to axioms is once you get really invested in all the thinking and all the debating and all the research you might have done based upon an axiom, you get pretty committed to that axiom, and you forget that it's a guess. It might be a good guess, but it's nonetheless, by definition, it's likely to be an unprovable guess. And I think that's at the heart of a great deal of conflict, is competing axioms. We would need to really play them out to see that. This is also something that's a lot easier to talk about than it is to actually do, but it would be that would be a fascinating topic.
I think that's a great suggestion, Jeff. And what I'm going to suggest, Ellis, is that we add two sessions. I've been wanting to talk about formal logic for a long time, and I want to talk about formal logic for the theory first, about how formal logic works and how to formulate logical arguments. And then another one will be like formal logic with examples, which is more what Jeff's talking about, which is what real life axioms do you use and how do you form a logical English language argument to defend a belief? Because I can even see in the chat, Dave said, by axioms, do you mean deeply held beliefs, Jeff? And I think some of what people, probably Jeff, you're alluding to, are doing are they're taking deeply held beliefs and they're making them axiomatic. Those are not really axioms, because those are facts that can be either defended or refuted with logic. Really, an axiom should be something that is so fundamental that it can't be defended or refuted with logic. It's just something that you have to either believe in or not believe in, and it's way more likely that you should believe in it. And so they have to be sort of fundamental rules of nature sort of things. And the other thing I want to agree with you, Jeff, is that I love the diversity of opinions we have in this community, and that I pride myself on, because we are not an echo chamber by any means. And I think it's really important that we continue to be a place where people can share all their opinions. And what I really love about the diversity of opinions is everyone has shared them politely, even though this is a deep philosophical subject about which people can get very passionate. But still, everybody has shared their opinions politely. And then ultimately, we can each come to our conclusion. And I hope people are learning from this in whatever direction they're learning. I hope they're learning something that helps improve their lives, because that's really the goal, is to improve people's lives of the organization. So thanks so much for your comments, Jeff, and the appreciation. I appreciate your appreciation. So, Olga, why don't you go next?
Hey, hi.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you to all of you. Earlier, you and also probably Ella said that you were saying that doing your research, and then you actually mentioned that it's a lot of fake sites right now, a lot of businesses who just replicate their website under other name. You see, it was much easier 20 years ago to find real information online than now. 20 years ago, the people still did not know these how to do all these information, I don't know, maybe say bubble, that you go to Google and you hit only what they want to you to click, only what they want you to click. And now on several pages, probably I don't know how many, first on Google, it's first websites who paid to Google for being on the top of the search. But I would like to say something about myself. It's from my experience. It's also, Jeff said that because of our different experience, we have different opinions. And I got I am older than most people here, and I got some health problems, and I was prescribed medication. And I got several times with side effects in emergency. So I started research, and I found out that huge number of people actually dying from prescription medication. Okay, I decided to try something herbal, and it was good with teas from Whole Foods. It's traditional medication, something like this brand, and it was kind of good. And then I read about celery, and it was, again, I did research and everything, and so many people saying, so many websites, how celery treating probably all everything. And so I decided to try. In my original country, celery never was popular, and nobody grew the celery. Okay, so I tried it, and I liked it very much. And then I end up with huge sunburn. I had ulcer on my face, and to find out that it's from celery, that celery could cause these sunburns, it was almost impossible. It's just one line on WebMD that it could cause sun sensitivity. And then somewhere you can find that farmer workers who work with celery have photodermatitis and something else, and some woman, and also in emergency. I did not in this case, but you see, it's even so you cannot get information about celery. I found out there was some kind of psychic who said that it's great and everybody should take it, should eat it, or drink the juice. And medium, not psychic, medium. He said, and I start to suspect that all these replicated websites probably have some connection to sunscreen business. You see, it's like conspiracy theory, but how you explain it, that so much information about something that could be dangerous. So I had bad experience with prescription medication. I have bad experience with herbal stuff. And I had actually also with vitamins. So it's very difficult to find any information right now that really you can trust. And so much of, it's not even fake. It's very hard to say what kind of this deceptive. You see, it's kind of, but it's not conscious deception. In some cases, it's conscious deception. In some cases, it's probably honest, whatever honest means, deception. But a lot of deceptive information right now in how kids going to survive in this, I am not even sure. I have some kind of experience, but they don't have this experience. So I really don't have good experience with what it's. Again, 20 years ago, I made research and I kind of could trust it online. But now.
Hi, Olga.
Yes.
Olga, thank you so much for that. It's true. There's a lot of deception now. And maybe we'll go to the next person, or Garrett, and then you can raise your hand again. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So yeah, and as far as what honest deception means, Olga, I think if someone is deceiving themselves as well as others, I would call that honest deception, because they actually believe what they're saying. when people are intentionally deceiving others, that's kind of dishonest deception, in my opinion. I think they're both bad, quite frankly, because they're still spreading misinformation. And to the person earlier who said that they don't trust people who believe they're right 100%. I think that was Jan. I agree with that, because those are the people that are more likely to be deceiving themselves. They've just believed that belief so strongly that they deceive themselves, and now they're going around deceiving others. Whereas those that hold beliefs a little more softly keep correcting using, learning and scientific method and learning from experience, and become more accurate over time through kind of a softness of the holding of their beliefs. That said, I want to let Zola go next. Oh, Ellis, we're getting down. We want to get people, we're actually winding down.
Yes,
we
yes, we're actually wrapping up shortly, so I just wanted to let them know a few things. So just to let you all know, I'm so glad I didn't realize MJ's here tonight. You can wave. She's actually going to be hosting next week's Valentine's Day discussion on love. So hope to see you all there. On the 21st, we're going to be discussing presidential leadership qualities. And on the 28th, Garrett's going to tackle the case for reincarnation. And also, if you check in the chat, if anyone's interested in growing the community and joining Garrett, there's a membership where you can read about the 5 intentions and send back your responses. And I put a short survey link as well in there. And thank you all for all of your participation. We'll take a few more people before we close.
I know it's not my turn, but I just want to very quickly say, this is Jenny. I just wanted to let you know that it was a nice extra treat tonight that I got to see your daughter. So just wanted to that's all I wanted to say. It was nice to get an extra treat tonight.
Thank you, Jenny. They're a treat for me every day. So I'm glad that you enjoy them as well. Zola, go ahead.
Thank you. I think many people seem to think there's some mystical power, mystical nature of intuition. One person said she thinks we should combine intuition and reasoning. Another person said sometimes it can have a superior. It is sometimes you should trust intuition more. I want to argue that there's nothing mystical about intuition. And I'll give 2 examples. One, if I do analysis on some problem today, tomorrow I will have a better intuition. My intuition, not necessarily better, but my intuition will be affected by the analysis I do today. For example, I'm relatively new in Toronto, and I often meet this situation. When I'm walking on the sidewalk, cars coming out and they occupy part of the sidewalk, and you get angry because you have the right of way. And at first I don't know what to do with it. When it happens, I don't know what to do. And then I come home and I think about it. I think I analyze it, or I do research, or I ask other people what they do. And next time I meet this same situation, my intuition is going to be largely coming from the analysis I did last time. The second example is imagine you record all of your experiences. There's a very powerful tool. that allows you to do so. And one day someone comes to you, say they want to borrow some money, and your intuition says, no, I should not trust that guy. And if you go to that tool and look up all of your past experiences with that person, you can understand why your intuition says so. So intuition is based on it's an inaccurate, or it's a fast result of fast result, and you can apply reason to understand it as long as you have enough time. So in the end, reason is the superior one. And I think you said sometimes big decisions you applied, you regretted, you did not trust your reason, you did not trust your intuition. If you had tried to understand your intuition when you try to make the decision, there will be no conflict in the future. Or if you perfectly understand, but maybe it's not possible perfectly. It's not possible to perfectly understand the basis of your intuition, but it's possible to try in that direction. That's it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's possible to try in that direction. I think you have faith that there is an explanation behind the scenes, which is the same faith that people who believe in determinism use when they deal with quantum mechanics, is that they have faith that there's some deterministic, some super determinism behind the scenes that's actually working things out, that doesn't violate Bell's inequality. Not to digress on free will, which we had another night last year, but I would ask yourself, what research do you base the belief that all intuitive decisions can be traced back to a reason based on one's life experience? I don't think there's any definitive scientific research that concludes that. So I would argue that your belief in that is perfectly acceptable, but right now it's a faith-based belief rather than a scientifically justifiable belief, similar to the fact that my belief that there's a spiritual reason for my gut instinct steering me in the right direction when I had no experience in certain situations. And those intuitive decisions would have been better decisions for me at that time on a pretty consistent basis over about a decade of my life, when I wasn't following my gut instinct, and even a decade after that when I started following it consistently. Those strong intuitive feelings led me in better directions. I admit that's a faith-based thing. I don't try to claim that it's scientific. All I can say is pay attention for yourself and see if it holds true for you. But I did experience that as a middle-aged guy, having challenged it and fought against it and then succumbed to it. So that said, I'm going to let Kafui go next, and then we'll let Michael and David go, and then we're gonna I'm sorry, Octavio is next. So I'm gonna let the people with hands up go. We're a little bit after 9. Let's just try to keep it brief, guys, because I do have to get to sleep. I was up really early this morning.
I'm going, Olivia is coming.
Sorry, let's let Octavio go first because I missed him. Sorry, Kafui.
I wanted to add something about the flat Earth theory, and I don't like it when those people are shut down on right away without being given some sort of thinking in terms of what context they're trying to formulate different theories of reality. And I think that there's more that we don't know about the truth, reality, science. There's psychology. We don't know where there's more that we don't know than we do know. So I'd like to see scientists be more humble and also explain be more open about the things that we don't know about, because for example, somebody could come up with an idea about how light works. It's we don't really understand too much about how light works. There's the double slit experiment that they're saying that our consciousness has something to do with it, and that just seems absurd to me. So I like to give those people the benefit of the doubt, when they talk about flat Earth theories, because it opens up reality for inquiry, and I think that that's healthy, and that's what I wanted to add.
Thanks, Octavio. Yeah, I agree that keeping an open mind is key to growth and learning, and that's why it's part of the second intention. And I forget the name of the book, but my father recommended it. It's a book about how major scientific advancements come one generation at a time, because only after the old generation who held strongly to those beliefs die out do the new generation of people rise up and actually challenge those ideas. And if you look at the back and forth of realism and romanticism, that's been going on for a very long time, where you kind of go one generation to the next, is a realist generation and then an idealist generation, and it goes back and forth, which I had a great Spanish literature instructor tell me about. That said, I want to let Kafui go next, and then Michael, and then we'll call it a night.
All right, thanks. So thanks for everybody. I think this is very interesting conversation. I just have some take on this intuition and reasoning, I think, and I would like to add a third dimension, logic. So I think intuition is accumulation of our ancestral experiences. So that's why sometimes when you have intuition, you can't really explain it in your own life, because it came from, you can say, part of our DNA, or over these thousands of years of evolution, that we experience things that when we see something similar, the body kind of reacts to it and say, hey, maybe this is something that you experience or your family heritage experienced 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. So maybe you should make a decision similar to that. Reasoning to me is an emotional, justifying our emotional response to things. So when we reason stuff, we look at things from our current point of view and see, how do we respond to it emotionally? Why are we doing what we are doing? So we try to find an excuse. I'm using excuse loosely here, an excuse for what we don't know. So we try to justify our beliefs in things. Now, logic, I think logic is a priori. So meaning it is independent of our experience. So for example, mathematics, 1 + 1 is 2, no matter whether you have emotional attachment to it or not. And that's why logic kind of supersedes all this, because logic is like a language spoken not only in human world, but it's also spoken in the universe. So I think, logic is probably the only language that you can go to space or any dimension, and it still can sound, or it still can be justified. The other two, intuition and reasoning, is only human experience. Logic kind of supersedes those, because it takes away the emotional attachment to things and just look at it purely from mechanical point of view. Say 1 + 1 is 2, whether I have a feeling or I have an experience before, it's still 2.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think logic is great in that it's very universal, consistent. It's, it's like the scientific method is to spirituality. And I would argue that's a lot of what spirituality versus spirituality / religion / what I call theoretical philosophy, but inconsistent philosophy is probably a better name for it. What they are to science is similar to intuition versus reason. And that's where I would argue it. We shouldn't choose one or the other. We should choose both, and we should choose the right tool for the the situation, because as the saying goes, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And when you run into a screw and you try to use a hammer on it, it doesn't work super well. Screwdriver works much better with a screw. So, you know, I think using the right tool for the right scenario is the best choice, and not to pick the same tool every time, you know, thinking that it always has the answer. That said, I want to let Michael go, and then we'll wrap up.
Yes, it's very interesting to look at it, how much of the reliability of different ways of approaching knowledge. So reliability of intuition versus common sense versus logic versus science. And we find that with intuition, most of our decisions throughout the day are based on our intuition. We don't do a scientific experiment to sit down and figure out whether we should use eat Cheerios or cornflakes. And when you're dealing with, let's say, your children, there's all kinds of things come up where you have to make a decision on what to do when your child does something, what your reaction should be. And you can't, that science is just developing. And even in medicine, you know, until the 1900s, the early 1900s, you were better off staying home when you got sick than going to see a doctor, or especially going to the hospital. The death rate was higher. You know, your chances of survival were lower. And the average life expectancy in 1920 was, or 1910 was only 45 years. The average life expectancy was only 45 years. Now, science had once science was adopted in the study of medicine and applied very rigorously, then the recommendations that the physician could make were far more reliable than before. So now the proof of that is that the average age of dying went up to in the 80s. Wherever
Look, you want to unmute, Michael?
What did you? Did anything I said come across?
Most of it, I think, did. The last 5 seconds or so didn't.
Okay.
But yeah, I appreciate your comments, and anything else that you wanted to add?
Well, I just wanted to say that the science is wonderfully reliable, but it doesn't cover very much.
Exactly.
It covers very little, and it becomes very little because it's so expensive and it's so time consuming to get answers using the scientific method. If you want to know what to tell that child who misbehaved, you want to know how to deal with it, the answers might not be available for another 100, 200 years.
Yeah, until it's too late to give them that advice. They've already outgrown that phase of life. And that's, you know, that's where, you know, I agree with you, Michael, and we have to make the best decisions we can at the time. And that was what I argued when I made the argument that science is not only not at odds with, but very compatible with spirituality and religion and inconsistent philosophy, is that there's a place for both. And science is great when it's got a very solid answer, but when science doesn't have a very solid answer, you know, looking to other paradigms to make decisions is not a bad idea, because using, you know, flawed science, or, you know, someone pointed out that a lot of scientific, you know, when they read scientific research, they look at the sample size. There are a lot of papers published on like 24 people, right? Like you can't make a statistically significant inference on 24 people. It's just not, it's not meaningful. Like it's, you know, randomness plays a bigger part than the things that they're studying. And it's lack of statistics knowledge of researchers that leads people to publish papers like that. And that kind of stuff frustrates me, because I have studied some statistics and know what it means to be statistically significant, and know that without statistical significance, your data can give you totally the wrong answer, just because you took too small of a sample size. And so science can sometimes be misleading, but then there are other times that science does have a really good answer and we should trust it. And where conspiracy would have to be so large that it would be unfathomable, and when there's no motive for such a conspiracy. And that said, I do want to close out. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. I hope you all enjoyed it. It sounds like we got a lot of good feedback tonight during the event. We'll hopefully also send out a survey, which I would love for people to fill out. Thanks again for the great comments, the very diverse opinions. We love those here at the FTI, and would love for people to join the online community and keep the conversation going throughout the week. And I want to highly encourage everyone to come to MJ's thoughtful discussion on Valentine's Day next week. Should be a lot of fun. She's great, so you'll enjoy her. So thanks a lot, everybody. Hope you all have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.